Hello guys, my name is Kaimana Kane, and today I'm going to be giving you a book review on what was the Underground Railroad. So, if you don't know what an Underground Railroad or what was the Underground Railroad, for starters, it's not even a railroad. Didn't have any trains, no tracks. Sorry, but it didn't have anything. And the Underground Railroad wasn't really a place or something. It wasn't a person. It was kind of like an association for slaves for them to run away. So it's kind of a big story. This book went over a lot of it and a lot of facts and a lot of different things, and I really liked it. So after I just read this book, I'd rate it a 9 out of 10. You guys should go read this book too. It's really interesting and it covered different things. So now to the book review. So the Underground Railroad was of course, not of course, but it was an association for slaves to um, join in on to run away from their slave owners. And slave owners were people who owned the slaves. There are two different types of slaves. There are house slaves, and they're like field slaves or whatever you call them. Those were the slaves that picked cotton in the fields and different things like indigo in the fields and different things. House slaves were basically maids, but they didn't get paid. They if the slave owner had a child, they had to protect the child with their own lives. They didn't get any money for being or doing what the slave owner wanted them to do. They fed everyone, they made the food, they cleaned the floor, not to clean the floor, but they cleaned all around the house, they dusted stuff and different things like that. So, the 1800s, when slaves were most popular, it was a really bad time back then because they didn't get treated equally, but then Martin Luther King Jr. stepped in and made sure that black and white should get all equality and different stuff like that because equality is important. You can't control your skin color, you can't control if you're black, if you can't control if you're white or different things like that. So that's why I also think equality is very important in treating others the way you want to be treated, the golden rule and different things like that. So if the slaves wanted to not really join but they wanted to run away from their slave owners, they'd have to somehow contact an underground railroad person or a member, and they had to contact them, and they had to get a place to meet so that they could help them run away. And I bet you guys have heard this name, Harriet Tubman. And the Underground Railroad had Harriet Tubman in their team, and Harriet Tubman actually helped a bunch of slaves escape from their slave owners, and they used the Underground Railroad members to help them escape. But there were also these things called slave hunters. So, a slave owner usually hired slave catchers or slave hunters to go hunt down slaves that has escaped from their property or someplace, and they tried to run away to a free state. And I can't name a lot of free states, but I know that free states are states that slavery is not, you can't be a slave or you can't be a slave owner in that state in the United States. But as we know at present day, the U.S. is free of slaves. But back then it wasn't. So there are different countries. I believe there's a map in here that shows you all the countries that had slaves, or not had slaves, but allowed slaves to be in there, slave owners. And there are also states that didn't allow slaves, anything like that. So the slaves, they used code words because the slave owners may have been eavesdropping on them, listening to their conversation and stopping their plan from escaping from them. And what they did was they used different like kind of railroad words. So that's why I think that it's called the Underground Railroad, because the owners wouldn't know what the heck that was. So They used different things like station, which was the place that they were gonna meet. They called themselves station masters, conductors, and different things like that. There was a bunch of other code words that weren't listed in this book, and different things like that. But the Underground Railroad, it was an association, and they helped the slaves escape from the owner's wrath. So what they did is they usually got together with a bunch of underground railroads, and maybe they had some white friends that were against slavery. So they'd somehow contact the white friends that are against slavery or the underground railroad members to help them escape. They could maybe get a big box and say it was gonna be shipped to a slavery-free state. But then that's when the slave hunters came in and they tried to catch the slaves. And I can't believe how many times that one girl got close to getting captured. Like they were in the same house and she was in a chimney. And like that's how dangerous it could be. That they searched the whole house. They searched every house in the neighborhood or the community, and they also used bloodhounds to sniff or get their scent and try to find them. A bunch of slaves got caught because of how good they are, and also some escaped slaves. They used many different ways of not transportation, but if they wanted to run away immediately, they could just run away into a forest. And how they used that is they looked at the sky. They used the North Star, just like how the Vikings did back in the 800s and whatever time period they used them. And they also use different ways of transportation by finding landmarks so they know where they are. And yeah, I think it was pretty interesting how just a bunch of slaves just created this, and like I can't believe it actually worked, because like there would be a bunch of slaves trying to protect, well, maybe not slaves but maybe white people who were also with slavery, and they tried to guard, but some slaves ended up running away. And I think it's just crazy how they did this. The Underground Railroad is, I don't know, I think it's really cool, and I think how of a good story it is. But I found some pictures in here, and now I'm going to show you. And here are the slave catchers. Here are the bloodhounds right here, and here are the pictures. So here's an Ohio Balanish, however you pronounce them, John and Jane Rankin, right here. And you also have wood engraving depicting a slave auction in Richmond, Virginia. And you also have a receipt from 1844, $250 payment for a male slave. Here, you have slave quarters at the Hermitage Plantation outside of Savannah, Georgia. Here's a poster advertising an anti-slave catchers convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on April 13th, 1854. Here's an 1851 poster warning African Americans about the fugitive slave law. And here's a photo featuring 5 generations of a slave family on a plantation in Beaufort, I think that's how you say it, South Carolina. There's 16 pages of photos inside, as you can see on the front. Here's a 1910 photo of Uncle Billy Marshall, an African-American conductor on the Underground Railroad from Ripley, Ohio. Here's a portrait of Ellen Craft wearing the disguise she used to escape from slavery. And here's an image circa, I think that's how you say it, 1875 through 1880 of African-American workers amid bales of cotton. So cotton was a really popular resource back then. Here's a photo of the 19th century painting that shows African Americans escaping from slavery. And here's in the title page of the first edition of Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 anti-slavery novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. There's a lot of photos on this page. Oil portrait from 1855, William Lloyd Garrison, founding editor of the abolitionist, or however you say it, newspaper, The Liberator. Here's a copy of the Liberator dated December 21st, 1833. Here's a lithograph from 1850 depicting Frederick Douglass and others as they watch Henry Box Brown emerge from a crate, which was a nickname of a guy who escaped from a box. Here's Caroline Quarles Watkins, and when she lived in Sandwich, Sandwich, Ontario. And here's an Underground Railroad operator, George P. Clark. There's a lot of photos in this. Here's a reward poster in 1847 in St. Louis, Missouri for the capture of 5 slaves. Here's the raising of a lantern on a flagpole in Ripley, Ohio, used to signal fugitive slaves. Here's Thomas L. Gray in front of his house in Beavertown, Ohio, which served as a station on the Underground Railroad. Here's the McGee House in Canisteo, New York, which was an Underground Railroad station. There were different stations that were told to the slaves to go to escape to, and which were free anti-slave states. Here's a wood engraving depicting African Americans in Washington, D.C. on April 19th, 1866, celebrating the end of slavery. And here is a photo from 1863 of slaves who found freedom in the North. So I think it's just a good story. At the beginning of this book review, I mentioned 9 out of 10. I recommend you guys go reading this. I'm really into the new book set of Who Was and What Was and Where Was, and that book's, and I really like this book. So make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, and Shaka out of here.